For the Honourable Mary-Ann Street.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise and speak to the Electoral Amendment Bill, and I wish to reflect on the contributions of the two previous speakers. I'm more than happy to pay another tribute to the Chair of the Justice and Electoral Select Committee, who does operate as a very fair and effective Chairman of Select Committee. And his account in his speech just before he resumed his seat was absolutely accurate, and there was a high degree of consensus around the proposals in this bill. And in fact, the way was cleared for the progress of the bill by the removal, the agreement by the National Party to remove the provisions relating to streamers and banners, streamers and rosettes on election day. That was a stumbling block, and it didn't need to be there. There was no persuasive factor ever in that provision, that permissive provision of the original legislation, and in fact, if anything, identification of people approaching people on election day is a good thing. So the National Party wisely decided that discretion was the better part of valour in that instance, and with the removal of those clauses, those sections which the previous speaker has alluded to, we saw our way clear to agreeing to the provisions in this bill. However, can I say to the Chair of the Select Committee, Mr Scott Simpson, that it is also part of the process that in the course of parties considering final reports and reconsidering final reports, that some of these shadows to which he referred emerge that may not have been apparent in the first instance. So, for example, I participated in the debate in the Select Committee as a Labour Party representative around the application of the Easy Vote card. And we talked about whether or not there was fraud or the potential for fraudulent use of the Easy Vote card. And there is no doubt that we saw as part of our duty as the Select Committee to ensure that the processes around voting remain absolutely clean and clear, and that the processes around voting retain an integrity for which our electoral processes are famous internationally. Mr Speaker, that consideration is the one that really dominated, if I remember the debate in the Select Committee accurately, that's the one that dominated the debate. And so the suggestion that people come and verbally identify themselves was seen to be a higher threshold of integrity, because it would be harder, as the argument went from members of the committee, it would be harder for a voter, to come up into the polling booth, approach an electoral officer and say they were somebody they were not. That presumption underpinned this provision, that it's actually harder for human beings to get up and lie about who they are, and then to go down the road to another polling booth and lie again about who they are, than it was to take an Easy Vote card, present it, take it back again, give it to somebody else in your family or somebody down the road to use, and the fraud would not be discovered until some time later. So I accept that the intention and the application of the Select Committee was to the integrity and the preservation of the integrity of the voting system. However, and I must say this to members of the Select Committee opposite, sometimes things shift in further discussion and debate amongst colleagues, and that is what has happened for us in the Labour Party. So that closer scrutiny of the even closer scrutiny of this gave rise to concerns which I think are legitimate and could be addressed by an SOP if we were able to work this through in a bipartisan or multi-partisan way to an improvement. And that is that the provision that is now being inserted into the bill, that is to go up and verbally identify oneself, does actually present, or potentially could present, an additional barrier to a voter, either by ethnicity, by not understanding an instruction in English, or by disability. And that barrier could prevent people from exercising their citizenship and their right to vote. So it is a legitimate concern, and I acknowledge to the chair of the Select Committee that this is different from the result of the discussion as we arrived at it in the Select Committee. I acknowledge that, but that's part of the richness of being able to go back and say, and for colleagues to say, hold on a minute, have you missed something here? And if I've missed something here, then it is my fault and the fault of Labour members on that Select Committee. But I would urge the Parliament to consider the strength of the argument that if we can agree to an SOP which ensures that the easy vote card and the treatment of it in this amended legislation is not abandoned and is not used in a way that, at least the replacement of it, is not used as a barrier to people voting, then perhaps we can still arrive at a consensus position on what the best form of protection is for the system of voting. So the primary concern of the Select Committee was to preserve the integrity of the voting process and protect it from any fraud. Whether or not there has been any fraud is a moot point, and I'm not sure that we were ever presented as a Select Committee with evidence that there was fraud. In that event, let us then look to see again as a Parliament whether the provisions that exist in the bill now make it harder for people to participate in a vote than easier, make it harder for citizens to exercise their right to vote than easier. We should make it as easy as possible for all New Zealand citizens and those entitled to vote to do that, to vote. But we should also make sure that we preserve the integrity of the system and maintain that it is as impervious to fraud as possible. So, Mr. Speaker, while there might appear to be a contradiction here, I do not believe there is. I think there have been some legitimate concerns raised by colleagues in my caucus in particular, which ought to be aired in this Parliament, and it is not beyond our collective wit to arrive at a satisfactory conclusion that delivers ease of casting a vote and protection of the integrity of the process. And I'd ask members opposite, when we get to the committee stages, to consider the SOP that will come forward from the Labour Party and apply themselves in the same spirit in which the Select Committee conducted itself to achieving the best resolution and the best improvements of our electoral system that are available to us. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope I've clarified some of that issue around the Easy Vote card. We do not want to see it done away with. We do not want to see it replaced by something that makes it harder for people to vote. We absolutely support recommendations and provisions in legislation that prevent fraud, but we have to find that balance, and it's not beyond our competence to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good speech.
I recognise the honourable member David Clendon.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.